Damsel is a 2D action shooter by Screwtape Studios that initially was fun in terms of fast-paced vampire slaying, but it wasn't long for its shortcomings to wane my interest. The game takes place where humans and vampires coexist with one another, albeit with an uneasy truce. Their peace comes from red mist, a synthetic drink the vampires manufacture to quench their thirst, without the need for human blood. As Department of Sanguinarian Affairs, Agent Damsel is sent in to investigate their latest drink may contain human blood, and if necessary, put a stop to their operation. The plot is primarily for providing context for each mission, yet they're all displayed in a strikingly vibrant, gothic comic book style. This style carries across its 3 chapters, with each one comprising 25 missions. Mission objectives like killing vampires, hacking computers, rescuing hostages, collecting skulls to name a few contribute to your score. The latter is imperative because it affects your score multiplier, and Damsel must collect these to keep it active while doing what she does best. Consequently, it determines how many points you get at the end of a level, and while there's no multiplayer, it does have online leaderboards, allowing you to compare scores and times, as well as the option to replay that specific stage. As I've already said, Damsel is a 2D action shooter, so obviously you'd be shooting vampires with a shotgun by pressing square. However, if Damsel gets too close, she either kicks them or uses her stake, although pressing circle and down while airborne will one-shot any vampire with this weapon. Damsel can jump, double jump, wall climb, hang and dash through enemies to cover more distance, as well as avoid attacks whilst making them drop skulls, assuming she's already found one within the environment. Of course, how many they'll discharge depends on how high your multiplier is. The game does a good job teaching you the controls, so you're ready for each archetype and the hazards she'll encounter as the game goes on. Toxic barrels that can make her or the opposition become acceptable to die in one shot, blood barrels for regaining health, though shooting them could spawn in more enemies, or how about spikes inhibiting your movement? Levels aren't linear but instead are like arenas, and it's up to you how Damsel fulfills her main objective, along with maximising your score. All these considered, it should have been a fun time. Slaying vampires, multiple obstacles, user-friendly controls, and leaderboards for besting other players in an appealing art style should have been a winner. At first, the experience was just that, but afterwards, the cracks became apparent. Firstly, Damsel's arsenal doesn't grow over time because there's no progression. The devs could have introduced new weapons like holy grenades for clearing out groups of vampires, having a limited amount at the start but can restore them by finding them within the level. What about a crucifix to block projectiles, as well as deter aggro foes from charging for a short time before going into a cooldown, encouraging players to decide when to use it. The combat could have been more interesting, notably when the difficulty ramps up, and it could have even served in a narrative context, indicating Damsel's predicament when facing new opponents. After all, her repertoire does become tiresome considering there are a total of 75 levels, all of which have no boss fights. Damsel has an issue when firing her primary weapon, as she can only aim up and down and left and right. Enemies on the X and Y axis are a non-issue, however against flying opposition, it's a nightmare because she can't aim diagonally. Getting in their face, shooting them or using her stake dive move are ways around this, but these aren't always reliable when there are projectiles flying from all directions, some of which can ricochet off surfaces. This problem worsens during platforming, due to the significant knockback from getting hit, which is vexatious when you're aiming to beat other players on the leaderboards. I also find it bizarre everything you do affects your score, except for bomb detonations and hostages perishing. It would have been better if you were penalised by point deductions, just as your accuracy influences how much you acquire. Hostages only create the illusion of danger and urgency, as you can ignore them when they're not the main objective, and it's annoying when you inadvertently kill them due to friendly fire, thus forcing a mission restart. Granted, they do contribute to your score when rescued, but for some reason, they somehow become invincible, even when vampires are still in their vicinity. As for bombs, you only have 15 seconds to defuse them, which may seem forgiving, though when taking into account how dense stages become, not to mention the overuse of its environments, they too amplify the frustration. Furthermore, they also lead to a mission restart, even when you're far away from the blast area. There are challenge levels where you must complete them as fast as possible, but these aren't any different from the normal ones, as they too time your run, thus making their inclusion pointless. Besides the campaign, Damsel has an arcade mode, the main difference being you must finish each chapter with only 3 lives, and if you lose all of them on any level, you must restart from the beginning. Since you're visiting the same levels with the same gear without the story element, this doesn't help the game's longevity. Add to the fact there are 3 difficulties, one of which makes you immune from enemy attacks. It's hard to take the game seriously when there are other glaring issues, like how the leaderboards don't update properly, saying that you've achieved a new high score, when in actuality it couldn't be further from the truth. Even the music is unfitting and monotonous. As previously, the plot only provides context, yet it never explores the characters and their universe. Not once did I give a toss for Damsel and her team, plus it all heads towards a lackluster conclusion. From the beginning, Damsel was enjoyable thanks to its distinct aesthetic and turning blood-sucking creatures into dust with user-friendly controls, but its moments of excitement receded soon after due to a lack of progression, dull story, shallow content and suspect design choices. I get the appeal of beating other players on the leaderboards, even though I'm not into online play these days, plus I'm in favour of games retaining player interest. However, what's the point of providing replay value when the whole experience becomes time-worn and riddled with problems? Damsel did suck me in initially, but it ended up being more trick than treat.